August 19, 1944. Wehrmacht Headquarters, East Prussia. General Alfred Jodl reviewed intelligence reports from France, and the numbers looked catastrophic for the Americans. Patton's Third Army had advanced 400 miles in 30 days. His spearhead divisions were racing toward the German border, but Jodl's staff had done the mathematics, and the conclusion was inescapable. The Americans have outrun their logistics, Jodl told his operations staff. The advance is bound to be checked by the friction of its own weight. No army in history has sustained such speeds without fuel. The laws of physics cannot be violated. An armored division consumed 150,000 gallons of fuel daily when advancing. Patton commanded 12 divisions spread across a 60-mile front. The supply depots were 400 miles behind at the Normandy beaches. Jodl's calculations were methodical and precise. Patton needed 12,000 tons of supplies daily. The damaged French road network couldn't support that volume. The Wehrmacht had destroyed bridges and rail lines during their retreat. The German staff predicted Third Army would grind to a halt at the Seine River. The pause would give Wehrmacht forces time to regroup, establish defensive positions, perhaps hold through winter. The mathematics were irrefutable. What Jodl didn't know was that American logistics officers were already planning something unprecedented, a continuous convoy system that would defy every principle of German military doctrine, an operation so audacious that within 6 days it would be operational. The Red Ball Express would begin on August 25th. Within days of its launch, Patton's supposedly immobilized tanks would crash through German positions at the Seine. The Wehrmacht's finest military minds were about to receive a lesson in American logistics that would shatter their understanding of modern warfare. The German General Staff's confidence came from brutal experience. They had pioneered Blitzkrieg and understood intimately how logistics killed offensives. Their own campaigns had repeatedly stalled when supply lines collapsed. In Russia, the Wehrmacht's advance had foundered not from Soviet resistance initially, but from inability to supply forces across vast distances. German trucks broke down on Russian roads. Horse-drawn wagons, still 80% of German military transport, couldn't match panzer speeds. Railway gauge differences meant supplies piled up hundreds of miles from fighting units. Entire divisions sat immobilized, waiting for fuel that never arrived. The Germans had learned this lesson in blood and frozen remains. General Heinrich von Luttwitz, commanding 47th Panzer Corps, understood American forces faced the same logistical impossibility Germany faced in Russia. Their mechanical advantage becomes a disadvantage. Machines require fuel, ammunition, parts. History teaches us what comes next. German intelligence meticulously tracked American consumption rates. A Sherman tank burned half a mile per gallon on roads, far worse cross-country. An infantry division required 700 tons of supplies daily. An armored division needed 1,000 tons. General Siegfried Westphal, Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Rundstedt, assessed on August 20th that the supply situation of the enemy was calculated to be impossible. The Germans expected a total halt that never came. August 25th, 1944. A requisitioned French chateau near Laval. Colonel Charles Thrasher, commanding the Advanced Section Communications Zone, faced a room full of skeptical officers with an impossible proposal. Patton's Third Army was consuming supplies faster than any army in history. Traditional supply methods had collapsed completely. Railway transport couldn't keep pace. Scheduled convoys were backing up at depots. The entire logistics system was breaking down. Thrasher announced they were going to create a one-way highway from the beaches to the front lines. Every vehicle would run 20 hours out of 24. No stopping except for gas and emergencies. Initial goal was 4,500 tons daily minimum. The technical specifications defied every principle of military logistics. 2 parallel one-way highways, one for loaded trucks forward, one for empties returning, 24-hour operations with headlights blazing, abandoning blackout discipline completely. Convoys at 5-minute intervals maintaining 35 miles per hour average speed. Mobile maintenance units every 50 miles. Military police checkpoints removing any vehicle below 25 miles per hour. Any truck that couldn't be fixed in 15 minutes would be pushed off the road and abandoned. Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Ayers of the Motor Transport Service reviewed vehicle requirements with Thrasher. They needed 140 truck companies, 5,958 vehicles minimum, operating at 90% availability. That was impossible by any logistics textbook ever written. Within 36 hours, the impossible was operational. The name came from railway terminology. A Red Ball freight was an express shipment that took priority over everything else. The Red Ball Express would operate on the same principle. On August 26, 1944, drivers from the 3916th Quartermaster Truck Company climbed into their GMC CCKW trucks. The Deuce and a Half, soldiers called them, loaded with ammunition bound for Patton's guns 300 miles east. Of the 23,000 drivers who would operate the Red Ball Express, approximately 75% were African-American soldiers. They served in a still segregated army that wouldn't let them eat in white restaurants or use white facilities in much of America. These men who faced discrimination and prejudice at home were keeping the most celebrated white general's army in motion. The irony was lost on no one. They were delivering the keys to a freedom they were still waiting to hold in their own hands. Every gear shifted was a silent argument for their own citizenship. The drivers developed their own culture immediately. They painted slogans on their trucks. Patton's Blood Bank, Hitler, Here We Come, Detroit to Berlin Express. The trucks became their identity and their pride. They created their own traffic rules that violated every military regulation. Slower vehicles pulled off immediately. Mechanical failures were pushed into ditches without ceremony. Any truck below 20 miles per hour was considered a roadblock to be eliminated. The drivers worked in teams, 20 hours driving, 4 hours sleep. They took military-issued stimulants to stay awake. They drank coffee by the gallon. They drove through exhaustion that would have hospitalized most men. Within 48 hours, they had established a rhythm that would continue for 82 days without pause. The Red Ball Express was rolling, and German intelligence was about to start filing reports that made no sense. August 28, 1944. German reconnaissance units began reporting something unprecedented from positions overlooking the main Red Ball route. The reports seemed impossible. Continuous vehicle column, headlights visible for 20 kilometers. No spacing, no blackout discipline. Officers from Aufklärungs 116 radioed estimates of 1,000 vehicles per hour passing their observation posts. The Americans had abandoned all military precaution. This violated everything German military doctrine taught about logistics operations. To a German soldier, in a dark foxhole, that distant, unending vibration wasn't just noise, it was the sound of an industrial giant that didn't need to sleep and didn't care if they did. General Edgar Feuchtinger, commanding 21st Panzer Division, personally observed the Red Ball Express from concealed positions on August 30th. What he saw confirmed what every frontline soldier already knew. His report to Army Group B headquarters reflected growing alarm. The speed of your buildup in the Red Ball was something beyond our comprehension, Feuchtinger reported. Vehicles pass at 30-second intervals, day and night, without pause. They don't hide, don't disperse, don't follow any rules we understand. What Germans couldn't understand was that American logistics operated on completely different principles. Where German doctrine emphasized concealment, Americans relied on overwhelming volume. Where Germans conserved vehicles, Americans assumed 20% mechanical failure and simply planned accordingly. Where Germans followed strict military procedure with everything scheduled and authorized, Americans improvised continuously. Individual truck drivers made decisions that in the Wehrmacht would require field marshal approval. The cultural difference was incomprehensible to German officers. First week, August 25th to 31st. The Red Ball Express delivered 89,939 tons of supplies, round-trip distance of 686 miles covered by each convoy. The performance exceeded every prediction. Headquarters had set an initial goal of 4,500 tons daily. The drivers were delivering nearly 3 times that amount. Patton's Third Army never slowed down for lack of supplies. By September 5th, cumulative tonnage reached 135,000 tons delivered. The convoy system was moving more supplies than the entire Wehrmacht in France received through their rail network. German intelligence officers couldn't believe the reports. Vehicle availability averaged 92% despite predictions of 70%. Drivers were keeping trucks running through mechanical failure, sleep deprivation, and weather that should have stopped operations. The maintenance crews performed miracles daily. German staff officers calculated that at this delivery rate, American forces could sustain offensive operations indefinitely. The prediction of imminent halt had been catastrophically wrong. Patton wasn't halting. He was accelerating. Reports from the front became increasingly desperate. Third Army had crossed the Seine on August 25th, exactly when German calculations said they would run dry. They liberated Reims on August 30th. They seized bridgeheads at Verdun on August 31st. The Red Ball Express was sustaining an advance that German military science had declared physically impossible, and the operation was just getting started. But to understand how this impossible machine was built, you have to look back at a man who had been obsessed with this problem since 1918. The Germans had overlooked who was coordinating American logistics. General George C. Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, was one of the most brilliant logistical minds the U.S. military ever produced, and he had been planning this for decades. During World War I, Colonel Marshall had orchestrated a logistics miracle. He discreetly moved over 600,000 men and 93,000 horses to execute the Meuse-Argonne offensive in 1918. He coordinated the massive troop and supply transfers right under German noses, primarily at night, in just 14 days. Marshall's personal experience in World War I logistics became doctrine for World War II planning. The Red Ball Express used principles he had developed 25 years earlier: continuous flow, redundancy, accept waste to maintain speed. In the 1930s, Marshall completely reinvented U.S. military doctrine at Fort Benning. That's where he trained most of the officers who would lead in Europe. He kept mental notes on every promising junior officer he encountered. On September 1st, 1939, the day Germany invaded Poland, Marshall became Chief of Staff. At that time, Eisenhower was still a lieutenant colonel, but Marshall already had him on his short list for high command. Marshall gutted the General Officer Corps between 1939 and 1941. He forced deadwood generals into retirement, some who had last fought in the Spanish-American War. He elevated new officers with entirely different qualifications. Marshall trained them, evaluated them, and chose them personally. Every great general the Americans fielded, Patton included, had been selected and mentored by Marshall. The Red Ball Express was Marshall's vision executed by Marshall's students. The actual architect of the Red Ball Express was General John C.H. Lee, Quartermaster Chief for the European Theater. Soldiers called him Jesus Christ himself Lee. The nickname wasn't affectionate. Lee was Bible-thumping, arrogant, and egotistical. After Paris was liberated, he moved his massive logistics headquarters into the Hotel Majestic, while combat troops slept in foxholes. The decision created massive friction with Eisenhower and Patton. Officers despised him. Enlisted men hated him. But Lee got supplies moving. He coordinated the supply trains that followed troops from D-Day beaches to Paris and beyond. He made the impossible operational through sheer force of will and organizational genius. Lee had been in logistics his entire career. He understood that war was won by tonnage delivered, not battles fought. Everything else was theater. Logistics was reality. When Patton demanded fuel, Lee found it. When ammunition ran low, Lee prioritized it. When winter clothing was needed, Lee delivered it. He didn't care if generals liked him. He cared about tons per mile per day. Lee's staff worked 20-hour days matching Patton's advance. They positioned fuel dumps 50 miles ahead of Third Army. They staged ammunition at crossroads Patton would reach in 3 days. They anticipated requirements before combat commanders requested them. The Red Ball Express was Lee's masterpiece. Wasteful, inefficient, brutal on men and machines. But it worked. And in war, Lee believed, working mattered more than elegant. Mobile maintenance units positioned every 50 miles performed miracles of mechanical improvisation. They swapped engines in 45 minutes using mobile cranes. German mechanics required 2 days for the same job. When trucks broke down, recovery teams descended immediately. Under the ironclad rule established at Laval, there was no time for repairs. If the truck couldn't be running in 15 minutes, it was stripped of its parts like a carcass and pushed off the road. The drivers didn't just lose a vehicle. They lost their only home. But the mathematics of the Red Ball had no room for sentiment, only tonnage. Winter presented new challenges. November brought freezing rain and snow. Trucks wouldn't start in sub-zero temperatures. Midwestern drivers from Wisconsin and Minnesota showed everyone winter solutions. They drained oil while engines were still warm, heated it over fires, poured it back hot to get engines started. They wrapped batteries in blankets and rotated them through heated tents. They mixed alcohol into fuel to prevent freezing. Tire failures happened constantly. The roads were rough, loads were overweight, speeds were excessive. The Red Ball Express wore out 180,000 tires in 82 days. Supply depots kept mountains of replacement tires staged at intervals. Drivers became expert mechanics by necessity. They learned to diagnose problems by sound, repair fuel pumps with improvised tools, and patch radiators with whatever materials were available. Every driver carried his own toolkit. The technical achievement wasn't the trucks themselves. GMC, CCKW trucks were reliable but not exceptional. The achievement was keeping 6,000 trucks operational simultaneously for nearly 3 months under impossible conditions. German soldiers in defensive positions learned to dread nightfall. That's when they could hear the American trucks most clearly. The sound of thousands of engines rumbling through the darkness never stopped. It was the hum of an empire that would not rest. Wehrmacht veterans described the psychological impact in post-war interviews. They could hear the convoys 10 kilometers away. The sound continued all night, every night. It was relentless and terrifying. A mechanical heartbeat that never slowed. German troops knew what the sound meant. More ammunition for American artillery, more fuel for American tanks, more food for American soldiers. The endless supplies meant the Americans could sustain attacks indefinitely. Captured German soldiers told interrogators they could estimate American offensive timing by listening to truck traffic. When the convoys increased, they knew attacks were coming, but knowing didn't help. They couldn't stop the supplies. The headlights visible from German positions added to the psychological effect. Those headlights were a glowing ribbon of defiance across France. It was the arrogance of abundance, telling the Luftwaffe and every German soldier watching, "We are here and you cannot stop us all." German artillery occasionally shelled the routes, but destroying one truck meant nothing when 5,000 more followed. The Americans simply pushed destroyed vehicles aside and kept rolling. The Wehrmacht couldn't interdict what they couldn't stop. Luftwaffe pilots who attempted to strafe the convoys found themselves facing overwhelming Allied air superiority. American P-47s and P-51s patrolled the routes continuously. German planes that attacked the Red Ball Express rarely returned. September 1944. Third Army crossed the Seine exactly when German calculations said they would run dry. They didn't slow down, they accelerated. The Red Ball Express kept them fueled and advancing. the cities the Germans swore would hold. The bastions of the Meuse and the Marne were bypassed or broken in hours. Patton crossed the Moselle River on September 5th. Every prediction of American logistical collapse proved wrong. German forces attempted to establish defensive lines. Third Army smashed through them before they could be fortified. The Wehrmacht was retreating faster than they could destroy infrastructure. Patton was exploiting that chaos. By mid-September, Third Army stood at the German border, 400 miles from the Normandy beaches in 6 weeks. The Red Ball Express had delivered every gallon of fuel, every artillery shell, every ration. Patton's advance was the fastest of any army in the European theater. British and Canadian forces to the north moved carefully and methodically. Patton moved like lightning because his logistics allowed it. The German prediction of imminent halt due to logistics had been wrong by months. Third Army never stopped for lack of supplies during the Red Ball Express's operational period. The trucks kept rolling, the Army kept advancing. Only when Eisenhower diverted fuel to Montgomery's Market Garden operation in mid-September, combined with increased German resistance at the Moselle River and West Wall defenses, did Patton finally halt. Not from Red Ball failure, from strategic decisions and stiffening enemy opposition. The Red Ball Express was brutally wasteful by any conventional logistics standard. Over 5,000 trucks were destroyed or abandoned during 82 days of operations. Each one had been someone's home on the road, stripped and discarded when it could no longer serve the mission. The attrition rate horrified traditional quartermaster officers. 57 million gallons of fuel consumed, much of it burned hauling fuel itself. The inefficiency was staggering, but the results justified everything. Third Army advanced 400 miles and liberated most of France. 180,000 tires worn out, mountains of rubber left in French ditches. Replacement costs ran into millions. The accountants calculated waste. The generals calculated German divisions destroyed. Drivers suffered casualty rates comparable to some combat units. Exhaustion caused accidents. Enemy artillery caught convoys on exposed routes. Mechanical failures killed men when brakes failed or trucks rolled. The human cost was 23,000 men pushed to the edge of physical collapse for nearly 3 months. 20-hour shifts became routine. Stimulant use was widespread. Sleep deprivation became a way of life. Maintenance crews worked until they collapsed. Mobile repair units operated around the clock. The entire logistics network ran on willpower and determination more than proper military planning. By November, when railways were partially restored and the Red Ball Express officially ended, the operation had cost $100 million, wasteful and expensive. But it had shortened the war by an estimated 6 months. Field Marshal Walter Model commanded Army Group B facing Patton's advance. He was among Germany's most capable defensive commanders. By October 1944, he understood what Germany was facing. Model told his staff they weren't fighting an American army. They were fighting American industrial capacity. The Red Ball Express demonstrated that the United States had mobilized its entire society for war production. German divisions fought brilliantly with dwindling resources. American divisions fought adequately with unlimited everything. Model knew which side would win that equation. It was simply mathematics. In post-war assessment, Model's staff reported that when they understood American logistics capacity, it was clear that the war was lost. The Americans could supply armies faster than Germany could destroy them. The Red Ball Express was a weapon against which they had no defense. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, among Germany's most competent commanders, was asked what most surprised him about American forces. "Not your tanks," he said, "not your planes, but your trucks." They were the deciding factor. General Heinrich von Luttwitz would later testify about how the Americans defeated Germany. "You piled up the supplies and then let them fall on us," he said. The contrast between German living off the land in Russia versus American industrial supply was absolute. German generals who had calculated American logistics would collapse were surrendering by May to armies supplied by those same impossible systems. The predictions haunted German military analysis. November 16, 1944. The Red Ball Express was officially discontinued after 82 days of continuous operations. Railway lines had been partially restored. The emergency was over. The massive operation disappeared in 72 hours. 23,000 men reassigned, 6,000 vehicles redistributed to other units. Routes returned to civilian use. The speed of dissolution matched the speed of creation. Final statistics told the story. Total cargo delivered, 412,193 tons. Total distance covered, 122 million ton-miles. Operating days, 82. The numbers represented the moment warfare changed forever. The Red Ball Express proved that industrial capacity mattered more than tactical brilliance, that logistics determined strategy rather than serving it, that the side with the most trucks beat the side with the best tactics. The operations methods became permanent American military doctrine. Continuous high-volume supply, accepting waste for effectiveness, became the standard approach. Every logistics operation since borrowed from Red Ball principles. In 1994, the United States Postal Service issued a commemorative stamp honoring the operation. Veterans attended ceremonies at the National Postal Museum. They spoke of pride in proving American determination could overcome any obstacle. The Red Ball Express ended, but its impact echoed through military history. German generals who calculated Patton's advance was logistically impossible learned the hardest lesson of modern warfare. Industrial democracy mobilized resources on a scale that totalitarian efficiency couldn't match. They had assumed Americans would follow European precedent. Conservative logistics, careful resource management, methodical advancement. Instead, Americans created a logistics system that overwhelmed German forces through sheer abundance. 23,000 truck drivers achieved what German military science declared impossible. They supplied advancing armies faster than physics should allow. They maintained tempo beyond human endurance. In his memoirs, Patton wrote that truck drivers of the Red Ball Express deserved as much credit for defeating Germany as any combat unit. They were black soldiers mostly, segregated and discriminated against. But they won the war as surely as any rifleman. The highways of France still bear scars from the Red Ball Express. But the greatest monument is the speed of Allied victory. Every day shortened saved thousands of lives. The lesson stands. In industrial warfare, victory belongs to the nation that delivers the most supplies, fastest, farthest. The German calculations had accounted for everything except the American capacity for total industrial mobilization, delivered at 35 miles per hour by the greatest logistics operation in history.